It's a fascinating paradox that missing someone doesn't often happen in the chaos of the breakup, nor in the heat of conflict. It begins in the quiet that follows, when the heart is no longer on high alert, when the nervous system has stepped out of survival mode, and when the body no longer braces for impact. That's when the missing begins. Women don't start to miss you when you leave. They start to miss you when they finally feel safe enough to remember you. Because memory, true memory, is not something that can be summoned in emotional turbulence. In the storm of detachment, what they remember is defense. They remember why they pulled back, what wasn't working, how they were let down. But that's not missing. That's analysis. Missing begins later, when the internal world becomes calm. It's a deeply feminine phenomenon, not just longing for your presence, but re-experiencing how your presence felt in the small corners of her life. The emotional architecture of a woman is built not only on the big moments, but on the thousands of micro impressions that accumulate over time. The brush of your hand across her back when you thought she was upset, the way you quietly held space when she was overwhelmed, the subtle attentiveness that made her feel known. Those moments don't surface in the middle of anger. They bloom in stillness, often long after you're gone. And here is the emotional irony. It is only after the tension dissolves that clarity is born. Once the self-protection softens, once she is no longer trying to preserve her dignity or convince herself of the reasons she should move on, she becomes capable of remembering with accuracy rather than agenda. She doesn't just think about what happened, she begins to feel it again, and that is when the ache of missing begins. Safety is often underestimated in relational dynamics. We think women miss us because of love, or attraction, or shared memories. But that's only part of the equation. The full emotional remembering only activates when there's no longer a threat. When there is no longer the fear of falling back into something destabilizing. When the emotional armor is no longer needed. That's when a woman finally grants herself the emotional permission to revisit what was real. And this is not nostalgia. It's not a sentimental revision of the past. It's embodied remembering. A woman doesn't miss you because she can't find someone else. She misses you because, in the sanctuary of her current emotional safety, your imprint rises back to the surface. She may have once needed to forget you in order to find herself. But after the forgetting, when the dust of self-reclamation has settled, the truth returns with nuance. You weren't perfect. There were wounds, unmet needs, misattunements. But there were also glimmers of being seen. There were moments of sacred intimacy. There was something between you that reached beyond explanation. The psyche only has room for that level of recognition when it is no longer trying to escape. In the early aftermath, she was likely seeking space, air, autonomy, release. She needed to restore her emotional ecosystem. She may have painted you in grayscale so she could move forward. But once the emotional air is clear and the nervous system is no longer contracted, what returns is texture, depth, warmth. She remembers what made you different from the rest. There is an extraordinary strength in this kind of missing, not weakness. It's not a regression into dependency. It's not a plea for reconnection. It's a reverent acknowledgement of what was once real. A woman who misses you in this way does so because she is now anchored in herself. She is not drowning in grief or spiraling in confusion. She is reflecting from a place of emotional sovereignty, and from that place she can finally allow herself to feel you again, not as an intruder, but as a meaningful presence that once helped shape her. The emotional body is incredibly wise. It stores what we cannot process in the moment. It safeguards what we cannot hold. And when we are ready, truly ready, it releases the memory with full spectrum. For a woman, this readiness often comes wrapped in solitude. In moments where she's not distracted or defended, when she's walking alone, sipping her morning tea, watching a couple hold hands on the street, and suddenly she feels something shift inside. It's a quiet flood, an ache without language, and it tells her she's safe now. To remember, to feel, to miss. There's a romanticized notion that when a woman leaves, or when she chooses space, she does so to escape a relationship that confined her. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes space is survival, but often that space is not an escape from you. It is an attempt to rediscover herself. She walks away not because she doesn't care, but because she needs to feel her own edges again, to remember who she is when she is not actively tending to someone else's emotional needs. This is not rebellion, it is reclamation, and it is within this reclamation that something very paradoxical begins to happen. She tastes freedom, the kind of freedom that is not just logistical, like choosing where to go or what to do, but emotional freedom. The permission to feel without negotiating, to exist without accommodating, to breathe without calibrating her every move to another person's state. In the beginning, this is invigorating. There is clarity, expansion, a sense of identity returning home to her. She doesn't have to answer to anyone. There's a quiet thrill in that. The silence feels clean. The solitude becomes sacred. But freedom, though intoxicating, is not always sustaining. Over time, it begins to illuminate not only what she wanted to reclaim, but also what she had to let go of in the process. Independence is a powerful force, but it cannot cradle her in the middle of the night. It cannot witness her silently unravel without trying to fix her. It cannot mirror the deepest parts of her back to herself, and it is here, in the echo of that emotional solitude, that a new kind of yearning emerges. Not for the relationship as it was, not necessarily for the day-to-day details, but for the connection that had once made her feel profoundly alive. She remembers the intimacy that was built not through grand gestures, but in the daily unfolding, the way your voice softened when she was tired, the way your presence anchored her in a world that often felt too sharp. These are not small things. These are the architecture of longing. And they rise not in the first taste of freedom, but after she's been living in it long enough to see what's missing. She may have imagined that self-freed discovery would be a linear journey. She reclaims her space, reclaims her power, and moves forward unburdened. But the heart does not move in straight lines. It circles, it revisits. It reopens doors we thought we had locked. When the noise of identity work quiets down, what remains is the truth of what was emotionally nourishing, what was felt but perhaps never fully understood. It is in her most autonomous moments that she begins to crave a certain kind of closeness, not dependency, not enmeshment, but resonance, emotional safety, spiritual attunement, and that craving is often traced back to the presence she once experienced with you. Not because you completed her, but because something in the dynamic allowed her to unfold in ways that surprised even her. That kind of space is rare, and the more she becomes familiar with herself again, the more clearly she sees what parts of her had once come alive in your presence. And so missing you doesn't stem from lack. It stems from depth, from having experienced something layered, nuanced, emotionally intelligent. Freedom teaches her how to return to herself, but it also reveals what is irreplaceable. Many connections feel good, few feel sacred, and it is only in the distance that she can truly discern the difference. In many ways, the freedom she sought becomes the lens through which she can finally see what was real. And what was real begins to visit her, not in urgent flashes, but in slow waves, while she's doing the dishes, walking through a crowd, laughing at something alone, and suddenly thinking about how you used to finish her sentences. She doesn't fight it, she doesn't dramatize it, she just feels it, a soft ache, a warm grief, a sacred reminder that even in her strongest moments there's room for connection, not as a substitute for herself, but as a companion to her wholeness. This kind of missing is textured. It's complex. It doesn't arrive in loud declarations. It tiptoes into her consciousness. It's the awareness that while she may not need anyone to be complete, she remembers the beauty of feeling met, of being understood in silence, of being held in moments where she didn't even know she was falling apart. That memory doesn't compete with her independence. It completes it. She doesn't miss you because she is lonely. She misses you because she is finally alone enough to tell the difference between absence and emptiness, between solitude and separation, between surviving and connecting. And as she expands into her freedom, she realizes it is vast enough to hold not only herself, but the memory of you as well. There's a particular kind of ache that doesn't begin when someone leaves. It begins when you realize just how deeply they were there. Not in the loud or obvious ways, not in the grand proclamations or dramatic gestures, but in the subtle, steady, and emotionally resonant moments that rarely called attention to themselves. That's the paradox of presence. It often becomes most visible only in its absence. And for a woman, the moment she starts missing you is not the moment you walk away. It is the moment your emotional presence continues to echo, long after your physical one has disappeared. She might be sitting in her car, driving a familiar route, listening to a song you once hummed. She might be making dinner, and suddenly remember how you used to quietly move behind her, placing your hand lightly on her waist. Not to ask for anything, not to take anything, just to say, "I'm here." And it's in those fragments of ordinary life that your presence begins to haunt her, not as a ghost of someone lost, but as a living memory of someone who once felt her deeply. Because that's what emotional presence is. It's not about being there all the time. It's about being there in a way that made her feel seen, felt, and safe. And for many women, that kind of presence is so rare, so deeply nourishing, that it only fully registers when the emotional current has been severed. She doesn't miss your face. She misses the way your energy filled a room before you even spoke. She misses how you knew when to hold her and when to leave her alone, when to speak truth and when to simply listen. She misses how you met her, really met her, at the intersection of her complexity and her vulnerability. Physical absence can be adapted to. It's tangible, measurable, you're not there. She adjusts her routines, her evenings, her weekends. But emotional absence is a different wound. It's not logistical, it's existential. It asks her to reorient her emotional reality around the loss of something intangible but intimate. You weren't just a person in her life. You were a presence in her psyche, a mirror to parts of herself that rarely got reflected back with that much clarity. And now that mirror is gone, there's a silence that follows emotionally rich relationships. It's not empty. It's filled with reminders, and these reminders don't just trigger memories, they activate sensations. Emotional presence has a way of embedding itself in the body. Her nervous system remembers how she felt next to you. Her breath slows as it did when you used to hold her in the middle of the night. Her muscles recall the relaxation that came when she cried and you didn't interrupt it, didn't rush to fix it, didn't pathologize her emotion. You let her be, and that permission became a kind of emotional home. Now that home is closed and she's walking its halls in her mind, touching the doorknobs of old conversations, sitting again in the living room of your shared silence, not because she wants to return, not because she's trying to rewrite the past, but because that presence meant something, and it doesn't just evaporate when you leave. What she misses is not the identity of who you were, but the quality of how you were. The emotional tone of your companionship, the safety she felt to unfold without defense, the fact that she didn't have to explain her sadness for it to be witnessed, that you didn't always need to understand her completely to stand beside her anyway. Those things matter. They linger, and they form the shape of the void she now feels. Perhaps she's met others since. People with charm, people who try hard, people who check all the boxes on paper. But presence cannot be manufactured. Emotional intimacy doesn't come from performance. It comes from attunement. And attunement is rare. It's not found in rehearsed words or well-timed compliments. It's found in the spaces between speech, in the glance that says, "I notice you changing," in the quiet embrace that says, "I'm not leaving just because you're difficult right now." That's the kind of presence she begins to crave, not as a romantic fantasy, but as an emotional truth. She's no longer looking for someone to rescue her or fill her. She is whole, she has grown, but within that growth there is still room for memory, still space for longing, still echoes of what it felt like to be met without conditions. And so, as she sits in her own silence, she doesn't reach for your voice. She reaches for your presence, for the sensation of being felt without having to perform, for the sacred normalcy you brought into her life, for the emotional shelter that didn't look extraordinary from the outside, but felt extraordinary from the inside. She doesn't need to speak your name. She doesn't need to text or call. The presence she misses is already inside her. Because when someone's emotional imprint is that deep, it doesn't just disappear. It lives quietly in the background until one day it begins to whisper, not to bring you back, but to remind her what was once real. There is a moment, often quiet and unassuming, when a woman finds herself face to face with a new connection. Maybe it feels exciting, promising even. There's lightness in the air, maybe laughter, flirtation, and the curiosity of discovering someone new. She leans in, listens, observes. She notices their words, their gestures, their attempts at affection. Everything seems in order on the surface, yet something essential remains untouched, and it's in that silent gap between appearance and essence that the missing begins. Not because she hasn't moved on, not because she's clinging to the past, but because her emotional body remembers a depth it once encountered, and now by contrast feels the stark absence of it. She doesn't want to compare, but she cannot help but sense, and sensing is different from evaluating. Sensing is embodied. It's involuntary. It rises unbidden and speaks through feeling more than thought. It tells her something isn't landing, something doesn't resonate. This new presence, kind though it may be, doesn't reach her in the same way. She begins to feel the difference between being admired and being understood, between being complimented and being attuned to, between having a conversation and being held emotionally in the space of vulnerability. She listens to the words, but they don't penetrate. She feels the gaze, but it doesn't anchor her. She laughs, but it doesn't unravel her guardedness. The connection stays polite, promising, perhaps even functional. But it doesn't stir her, and so a different kind of ache emerges, not for the person who's gone, but for the emotional depth that once made her feel real, fully alive, known in ways that bypassed words. When someone new steps into her life, they're not competing with an ex. They're unknowingly contending with an imprint, an echo of emotional resonance that is hard to duplicate because it wasn't built on similarity or chemistry alone. It was built on the rare experience of being met where she lives emotionally, not just where she appears socially. There is a moment in every woman's life when she realizes how rare it is to feel emotionally safe in the presence of another, and once she's tasted that safety, everything else feels loud or thin. Surface-level attraction becomes exhausting. Performative romance feels like a play she's watched too many times. Because when someone has seen her, truly seen her, in moments where she was messy, contradictory or afraid, and chose to stay present, a bar is set. Not a bar of perfection, but a bar of depth. And that depth doesn't just disappear when the relationship ends. It stays inside her like a compass, subtly pointing toward what was real. She might try to rationalize it. Maybe this new person just needs time. Maybe she's being too guarded. Maybe it's just early, but her body knows. Her emotional system responds, or doesn't, and the absence of that spark is not about entertainment or novelty. It's about presence. She doesn't want more attention. She wants emotional contact, that invisible thread that says, I'm here with you, not just next to you. In her solitude, she may find herself reflecting, not to romanticize what was lost, but to acknowledge the impact it had. She remembers the quality of presence that didn't require translation, the way silence could hold both of you without discomfort, the way her fears didn't scare you away, and her strength didn't threaten you. She remembers how she didn't have to shrink herself to be loved. She could be complex, sensitive, bold, quiet. All of it was welcome. Now, with someone new, she feels the need to manage impressions again, to modulate, to test the waters before diving deep. And while she can do that, she's done it before, it feels like regression, because she knows what it's like not to have to. She knows what it's like to be emotionally naked without fear of abandonment or misinterpretation. That kind of space is sacred, and it doesn't come often. This is the beginning of the kind of missing that is not about clinging to a person, but longing for a presence, for a level of intimacy that was both grounding and expansive. When someone new fails to echo that, she doesn't blame them. She doesn't even hold it against them. But in the quiet of her heart, she begins to realize that what she had was not ordinary, that the way she was held, seen, and allowed to unfold was not common, and that realization doesn't make her desperate. It makes her discerning. She becomes more careful with her energy, less interested in surface connection, more attuned to the difference between someone who wants her and someone who gets her. She stops chasing sparks and starts listening for stillness, the kind that comes when someone sees into you and stays, the kind that leaves an imprint so deep even the most charming stranger cannot reach it. There comes a time in a woman's journey when growth no longer looks like detachment, silence, or forgetting. It begins to look like remembering differently, with new eyes, with a new self, and with a sense of depth that only emerges after the storms have passed. In that space of reflection, she doesn't just think of what was. She sees who she has become, and through that lens, she starts to trace the ways your connection shaped her. sometimes gently, sometimes painfully, but always profoundly. And it is in this quiet, nonlinear unfolding of self-recognition that missing you begins. It doesn't start in the place of desperation or lack. It doesn't scream for reconciliation. It whispers through the memory of what once opened her, challenged her, mirrored her. Emotional growth is often tethered to relationships that held enough intensity to awaken something inside, whether it was love, conflict, passion, or vulnerability. The dynamic became a classroom for parts of her that textbooks couldn't reach, and when she steps far enough away from the immediacy of emotion, she begins to notice. She isn't the same person who once stood before you. Her voice is stronger now, her boundaries clearer, her sense of worth more intact. But those shifts did not arise in isolation. They were shaped in part by what unfolded between you. Maybe it was how you listened deeply without trying to fix her. Or maybe it was how you challenged her to face her fears, to speak her truth, even when it scared her. Maybe it was your presence in the darkest nights, or maybe it was your absence that forced her to grow roots of her own. Either way, the result was transformation, and now when she reflects on your presence, she doesn't only remember the hurt or the beauty. She sees herself through that time, the version of her that was still unraveling, still discovering, still unsure of her own power. And alongside that, she sees the role you played not as her savior, not as her teacher in any conscious sense, but as a part of the alchemy that helped her become. The woman she is today didn't grow away from you, she grew through you. There is a very particular ache that comes with realizing someone was part of your becoming. It's not regret, it's not nostalgia, it's reverence. It's a deep bow to the experience that broke something open in her. And as she integrates that growth, she starts to feel the emotional weight of what was once shared. Not because she wants it back, but because it matters, because it was real, because it moved her toward herself. This is a more mature kind of missing. It's not built on longing to go back. It's born of clarity. She has walked through her own fire now. She has stood alone, faced her patterns, healed her wounds, and still, something inside her acknowledges the seed that was planted in your presence, the way her soul expanded in response to yours. And that kind of acknowledgement doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. It lives in her body, in her memories, in her quiet moments of gratitude, even if they are laced with sadness. Sometimes she sees this growth reflected in how she now loves. She finds herself more patient, more discerning, more embodied. She doesn't chase approval or dim her light. She's no longer afraid to ask for what she needs, and in that realization, she may remember the version of her that once couldn't do any of those things. The version of her that learned, sometimes through pain, sometimes through love, how to hold herself. And you were part of that learning. There's a subtle emotional alchemy that occurs when growth and memory meet. When she looks back, it's not to revisit the past. It's to connect the dots, to see how each moment between you carved out space for who she is now. The laughter, the intimacy, the rupture, the tenderness, it all wove itself into the story she now tells with her presence. And though she stands alone now, something in her whispers, you were there too. This is why she starts to miss you, not as a partner to reclaim, but as a witness to a chapter that shaped her. Someone who held a mirror when she didn't know who she was becoming. Someone whose presence, flawed and beautiful, sparked a transformation that cannot be undone. And in that recognition, there is a soft ache, an honoring, A moment of stillness where she realizes that growth doesn't erase the imprint of the one who helped stir it. It holds it, quietly, like a secret that only she will ever truly understand. When a woman begins to miss you, it is rarely immediate, and never as simple as absence equals longing. It unfolds through layers, through memory, growth, silence, and comparison. She doesn't miss out of loneliness, she misses from a place of emotional truth. It happens when she finally feels safe enough to reflect, when the nervous system quiets and she can truly revisit what was shared, not just the conflict, but the connection. It happens when she's reclaimed her freedom and tasted its sweetness, only to find it lacks the intimacy she once experienced. It happens not in your absence alone, but in the weight of your emotional presence that lingers long after you've left. It happens when someone new enters her life and cannot meet her in the places you once did, not because they're unworthy, but because you imprinted something deeper. And perhaps most profoundly, it happens when she looks at herself and sees her own evolution through the lens of what you once shared. Missing, in this context, is not regression, it is recognition. It is the heart honoring what mattered, what helped shape her, and what cannot be replicated. You are not simply a chapter in her story. You are part of her becoming. And though she may never say it aloud and may never return, her quiet moments carry the imprint of your presence. Not because she hasn't moved on, but because some connections live in the marrow, far beyond the timeline of the relationship itself.